on the other hand, there's people who will see that the reports coming out of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change out of the UN, and say, we are in this moment of urgent crisis that we've never dealt with before, and the energy companies are to blame, right? And because this energy they're producing is, polluting and producing too much carbon dioxide in the air, among other things, methane and others. But although I think some people who dive right into the narrative don't even get to the details of what the gases are. But there's this narrative that, okay, that means that the energy executives are evil, right? We've heard that actually from prominent politicians. And I think that some people just embrace that narrative purely and never actually think about the fact that, okay, but everything we do is run by energy, and we, at this point, still need to rely on some of those sources. What I'm interested in is how do we look at sort of the purely celebratory progress is great and this is everything versus the everything is in jeopardy and this is the cause. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, there's some truth in both of these, right? And yep. I would imagine that you, in your role, given that your passion has been for the environment and nature, and that you wrote that in your journal when you were still in college, and then you ascended to the top of one of the largest energy companies in the country. I'm sure that you've heard all those narratives coming at you from different angles. And I'm sure that knowing you don't just embrace the hard line narrative of either of those or anything in between. What I don't know is how do you think about that? And it's the reason why I'm having a hard time even sort of like finishing my sentences right now is that this is just such a complicated area of how do you wade between narratives and how do you take something from each of them? And have there been times when you've heard something from someone who is attacking you in an ideological way and they're very genuine maybe, and you've actually learned something and said, wow, I need to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do, there is truth in both narratives. So everything depends on electricity today. Right. Nothing happens without it, and increasingly so. We're going to electrify transportation. We're going to electrify the heating of buildings.
Well, that's a piece people don't think about. Electric vehicles, great. Yeah. Well, those are going to be run by the current
electricity. Yeah. So it's there is nothing more fundamental, perhaps, than air and water and food to human life anymore. So it's not hard to connect our people to the importance of what we do. But it's also true, and I've said to our people, we lie at the intersection of economic progress and environmental progress. Our industry is right at the cross-section.
Yep.
And it's our job and our responsibility to grab the environmental progress piece of that and make it real. And I do believe we're at a point of crisis now, and we do need to address the climate crisis with absolute urgency. And so they're both true. Now, I think that the people I respect most and the most mature thinkers, I think, get both narratives.
Yeah.
And they understand how we got where we are. And they understand that you don't change that overnight, but they have an expectation that good leaders are going to get after it and create positive change. And I think, the time for real criticism is not because somebody is in an organization that needs to be improved.
Right.
It's when they refuse to take on the job of making it better. And so, when I arrived at DTE, we were a company that had, for a lot of historical reasons, built a lot of coal plants.
Yeah.
I didn't build the coal plants. At a young age, I was responsible for operating a lot of those. And I remember thinking at the time, well, this isn't what I thought I'd be doing when I said I want my job to be about environmental improvement.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I thought I'm in front of an organization that can make a real difference here. And I'm kind of on the battlefield in the middle of the fray with an opportunity to change things. And started to think seriously about the climate issue. And then as time went by, that role offered me the opportunity that you described, which was to be in the middle of climate policy. I remember the first time that happened in a tangible way was in the Obama administration. And he proposed the first real climate policy for our sector in the country's history. It's called the Clean Power Plan.
Yep.
And I, at the time, was chairing the industry's environment committee. So I had the job of trying to pull together the CEOs from energy companies all across the United States around this proposed plan. And at the time, this was back in 2015, that was not easy. There were a lot of different opinions. Local politics varied a lot, state by state. We were working with the EPA. Gina McCarthy led the EPA. She's now the President Biden's domestic climate advisor.
Sure.
And so I was just lots of late evening meetings and meetings in Chicago of industry leaders, and we eventually got there. And we came to agreement with the administration, the Obama administration, that we would target a 20% reduction in carbon by 2021 and a 32% reduction by 2030.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just tell you that felt hard and heavy at the time. But I was so happy to have a framework in place that our industry could begin to work again. I remember toasting Gina McCarthy and saying, congratulations for putting in place a framework that is going to begin the process. It's not the end, but it'll begin the process of us doing what we need to do. And she looked at me and said, geez, I'm not sure how to feel about being toasted by an industry executive. She kind of laughed, and because we all felt good about it. But then of course, came the election of 2016.
Right.
And Donald Trump came in touting the revival of coal. And within a couple of weeks of his victory, he said the Clean Power Plan is going to go on the scrap heap.
Exactly.
And I remember saying to my wife, good God, I feel like I've wasted a year of my life. I was so depressed by the whole thing. But that wasn't the end of the story. We're back in the next round. And the interesting thing about all of that was that the industry in the ensuing time is actually not down 20% by 2021, which was the Clean Power Plan. We're down 40%. We're double what we talked about. And I think that all that work actually kicked that in motion. And the strange thing is that right through the heart of the Trump presidency, the industry made its sharpest, fastest move to take carbon out of its production. So all of his talk of reviving coal didn't do a lot. In fact, quite the opposite was happening.
And there's still some people in power who are fighting in that direction, though. Is that right?
It's a losing battle.
Yeah.
It's, I think if you talk to anybody in the industry, coal production is going to go away. It's, look, it was the heart of production in the 1900s. In the 2000s, we need to move on to other things. It's just the way it is. So if you watch the industry trade press, you just see a regular cadence of announcements of coal plant retirements. I just saw a big one the other day that our neighbor AEP announced another big plant. So that is going to happen. There are those who claim it won't or say they're trying to fight, but that's a losing battle. The real battle is trying to piece together what's actually going to be needed to have the entire economy rest on electricity and do that in a reliable, zero-carbon way. And we've got some of the things we need to create that future, but not all of them yet.
Yep.
And this decade of the 2020s is going to be a decade where we make a lot of progress, I think. I think we'll probably take, the next 30 or 40% of the carbon out. So we'll be 70 to 80% down, I would guess, by the end of this decade.
So the IEA did a report this summer that basically said, what's the path to net zero? And they said the 2020s is going to be pushing and implementing stuff we already know how to do. 2030 on, though, we really start to rely on, RD&D. Or maybe there's 3 Ds now. I don't know.
Yeah, there are 3 Ds.
Research, development, deployment, or demonstration
and then deployment, right.
So from your perspective, I don't know if you saw that report, but does that sound right? Is this the decade of trying to push the stuff that we know how to do while, investing heavily in research so that come 2030-ish, we've got more stuff that we can start implementing? Or how does that look to you?
Yeah. Yes, I think fundamentally that's the right narrative. And it's the one I've described when asked by members of Congress and the sort. I said, look, the 2020s is going to be a decade of heavy, heavy investment in renewables. And we're going to continue to retire coal. And we're going to maintain and in some cases add natural gas as required to maintain reliability. Natural gas is much lower carbon than coal. But eventually the natural gas needs to be decarbonized too.
Yep.
And so the 2020s is largely about things that we already know how to do and technologies that have already reached maturity. But then you hit a wall. You hit a wall with about roughly 20% of the carbon left in our sector. And we need new technologies. And renewables and batteries alone will not do it. Renewables play an incredibly important role. We're going to build a ton of them. But batteries today are good for 4-8 hours of storage. We need storage that can take renewable energy from August to December in Michigan.
Yeah.
When the sun isn't shining and the wind's not blowing, and we actually need very, very long duration storage of energy. That won't be batteries. And if you try to make it batteries, we'll mine the world inside out for precious metals.
Right. That's another thing people don't think about is the sources of materials for all these things.
So we're going to need other things, whether that's hydrogen production or whether it's capturing the carbon from natural gas or whether it's an altogether new form of storage, not the chemical batteries that we have today, or perhaps it's these advanced nuclear technologies that are much safer and can serve the need. But everybody thoughtful that I've talked to believes we are going to hit that wall with roughly 20% left, and we have to have these new technologies, which is why we continue to say to Congress, you have to allocate substantial funds for research and development and demonstration in the 2020s so that we can begin to deploy in the 2030s.